It's a little. I'm not the best of AV guys, but I try my best. Thank you for coming to the second installment of this iteration of Remarkable Responsa, the precedent-setting Chuvot. Today we're going to, last time we focused on Rav Asher Weiss and corporations. Today our focus, and we mentioned Rav Moshe Feinstein. This week is going to be more focused on the methodology and novel interpretation and decisions of Rav Moshe Feinstein related to a particular topic, related to the topic of Rodef. So what I'd like to do is give a little bit of a background from the Psukim in the Torah as the idea of a pursuer and the permission of self-defense, even if it means taking a life, even if the pursuer is not clearly threatening one's life, and the way in which a pursuer or a person who breaks and enters a domicile without permission, in a sense, forfeits his life, and therefore it's justified self-defense. And how that manifests itself in a couple of interesting cases. We're going to talk about whether there's permission within halacha, Jewish law, to allow for enhanced interrogation methods, otherwise called torture. And it's fascinating where there's this divergence we'll see between, let's say, international law. And we have to ask ourselves whether international law has any status. We know that Dina de Malchuta Dina has standing, but what about international law? Israeli law, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, and whether halacha agrees to those conclusions. And then secondly, we're going to deal with a case, and there's a piece of a tshuva from Rav Moshe that is helpful in our understanding of that topic. And secondly, we're going to deal with an unpublished responsum of Rav Moshe Feinstein that is written about extensively by his son-in-law, who just passed away last year, Rabbi Dr. Moshe Tendler, about the case of Siamese twins, where only one can survive. And how do you navigate that when we value life? But what if to save one of the twins, the other twin will inevitably or have to, by scope of the surgery and procedure, will their life will end, because otherwise neither of them will. Or do you allow nature to take its course and for both twins to expire without any interventions? So a little bit of the biblical background, right? In general, if a person is confronting you and is going to harm you in a way that is less than life-threatening, you're not allowed to kill them. They're not threatening your life, and life is a ultimate value. You're not allowed to threaten them, right? So you're not allowed to kill them. So if they're stealing from you, there's some famous cases that have been in the news lately. Right? Somebody is suspected of stealing. There's no permission, right? You want to stop them. You want to catch them. There's no permission to use deadly force if the crime is only monetary. There's an exception, though, mentioned in the Torah. The exception in the Torah is a case where what's called Bava Machtera. Person comes under cover of night and enters your home, and you don't know what's going on, right? You don't know. We don't know what their intentions are. It's dark. You don't know to what extent they are armed. You don't know what their intentions are. So the Torah says Elo Damim, and by that it is justifiable to stop that person and even to neutralize them, even if it means taking their life. And the reason given is because this person, by doing it in a stealth way, has, as it were, forfeited their life, right? And this idea has been extended to to other situations, not just a case of Bava Machteret, but in other cases, more broadly referred to as Rodef, a pursuer. If someone is pursuing you to kill you, you don't have to say, well, be passive about it. You don't have to just let it happen. You can defend yourself even with deadly force, right? So if someone comes to harm you in a way that could be perceived as being life-threatening, you can preempt that from happening. And it's not just to understand the halacha as understood by the Talmud. It's not just the person whose life is threatened, but it's anyone, even an observer, right? So if someone's pursuing me, any one of you in the room can neutralize that person, because by seeking the end of my life, that person has put their life, the aggressor has put his life in jeopardy. And anyone who sees this is allowed, is justified, is even encouraged, right? Literally to not stand by idly while your brother's blood is being spilled. So that's the background. So what about where it's not direct, where the death, where the murder, where the loss of life is indirect? Take the case of enhanced interrogation methods, right? You catch a person, right? Whatever agency it was that captured this person who is suspected of being engaged and involved with bad people. And why did the agency catch this person? They caught this person because they have information about an attack that's about to happen. Now, obviously, this person in custody is not engaged in actual murder because they're sitting with me. They can't harm anyone except for me. And we put handcuffs on him. He's not going anywhere, right? So, but he has information that could prevent he has information about a potential event that could be deadly for other people, right? You think about Palestinian terrorist attacks. You think about even attacks in this country, right? There's a network of people, some of whom are involved in actually carrying out those attacks, and then a small group of other people that know about it. And let's say you catch someone where you have a great degree of certitude that this individual knows how this attack is going to happen, where this attack is going to happen, who's going to be involved. So what can you do to stop the attack? Now, if you were with the terrorist, right, himself, with their explosive belt or with their gun, you can obviously shoot them. This guy doesn't have a gun. This guy's nowhere near potential casualties, but they have information that could be useful in order to prevent and neutralize the threat. So are you allowed to torture that person? Are you allowed to engage in extrajudicial enhanced interrogation methods? So in September of 1999, this is before 9/11, the Israeli Supreme Court ruled that torture in all these situations is prohibited, even to conjure and to gather information that can prevent an imminent attack. The president of the Supreme Court at the time, Aaron Barak, wrote the decision and included in it that, quote, the prohibition of torture is absolute as a matter of law, of international law, in accordance with international treaties, of which Israel is a signatory of. In other words, the president of the Supreme Court said Israel has signed treaties that obligate them to follow these rules, and there are no exceptions, right? There are no exceptions to this. So perhaps let's, if you don't mind, if you go to the bottom of the first side of the source sheet, there's a small quote there from a sefer of Responsa by Rav Shol Yisraeli. Shol Yisraeli was the founder of a Kol Eretz Chemda in Israel. You might have seen some of their books and some of their work product, which seeks to create religious Zionist poskim. For some of them go on shlichut to other parts of the diaspora, and then go back to Israel. So Roshal Yisraeli wrote in his Sefer, and it's about this idea that Israel, or that we are all bound by international law. In other words, we hold Dina de Malchuta Dina, right? We hold that the law of the land applies, right, except in matters of religion, right, in matters of civil law for the most part, in other areas of day-to-day activities. If it's illegal, then halacha would say you have to follow that. You have to follow that, right? You have to. But so what about this? Right, the president of the Supreme Court made the argument that torture is banned by the Geneva Convention. So does that automatically take it off the table as a practical consideration? So it's a short piece of the last source on the bottom of the page on the right side. Mayate nomar shedina de malchuta shebein medina and medina. Right, this idea of international treaties, creating some sort of dina de malchuta, the law of the globe, that then becomes required of everyone to observe. Hugam kein mitam haskamat b'nei medinot. It's based on an agreement among nations, right? V'af al pi shezeh nogel ledina haskamat hamoila, right? Ledina nefashot haskamat hamoila. Even though we're dealing with matters of life and death, if everyone agrees, then we should have to conduct ourselves in that way. Right? Rules of engagement, rules of warfare. If it's agreed upon by everyone, right, and the emphasis is on everyone, don't be the sucker that abides by it and no one else is, right? But if everyone agreed to it, then yeah, maybe there is Dina de Malchuta. Right? The inachinami im yavo ha'amim kulam lidei haskama la'asor ha'milchama. And he says, let's say everyone agreed that war is prohibited, and everyone agreed to that. And you didn't just say it, right? But you practice what you preach. You didn't just sign something, but that's how you postured yourself, right? Imagine there's no war, to paraphrase a famous Beatle, right? So, ba'ovan shazeh yifso mliot hu chok hanag ba'amim shuv lo te'eh milchama chukit v'lo hakivush. If it's true that nobody's doing it, then you wouldn't be allowed to engage in a milchamet reshut, right? Anything that's short of milchamet mitzvah, which is for a different topic. Then anyone who would engage in warfare would by definition be considered to be a murderer. Because if the whole world agreed in word and in deed to not engage in warfare, and one country went ahead and was an aggressor, then that country would, by default, by definition, be considered a murderer, regardless of what they claim to be their justifiable reasons. Ulam, this is the kicker, right? 3 lines from the bottom. Kol od hanoeg shel milchama hu mekubel ba'amim. Right? Just ask current events, right? Whether it's war or whether it's posturing for war, whether it's the possibility of war. Nobody says, oh, it can't happen. The world agreed that there'd be no more wars, right? Nobody says that. That being the case, ein hamilchama asura gam ufiyatim. Right? So to take it beyond just Israeli seems to be talking about, well, is any war permissible? Right? What about international agreements? He says, if they acted according to what they agreed to, then maybe. But since they don't, right, we don't have to be the suckers. Right? Halacha isn't going to say, Dina de Malchuta, so you're the only ones that have to practice what you preach. No, that's not the way it works. Mitam zeh, mitarat gam Yisrael milchemet reshut. Right? So it allows, but this can be a basis for broader, in other words, right, enhanced interrogation methods. Oh, no one does it. And yet, look a little closer, and everyone does it. Right, so Rav Yisraeli, I think, is very much directly responding to the idea, if not the actual words, then the idea of, let's say, the Chief Justice of the Israeli Supreme Court, who wants to limit Israeli law based on Dina de Malchuta. Rav Yisraeli says that's not really the way it works. Dina de Malchuta is based on the practice of the nations as agreed upon by the treaties, not what the treaties claim to say, but what they actually say and how they're actually interpreted and abided by in the real world. So that's number one. So all that means, and I wanted to start there because what that means is that Dina de Malchuta, for our conversation, for our purposes, is off the table. It's not going to be, right? We can't say, well, have the nations agreed that enhanced interrogation methods are prohibited? We don't care because everyone's doing it. So if everyone's doing it, now we have to ask, what does halacha say about it? What does halacha say about it? So what Rav Moshe Feinstein tells us in the tshuva, sort of four sources down, is that there is when we think about the classic biblical case of Rodef, it's a case of a person being active, of pursuing, right? With a knife in their hand, with a gun in their hand, with something, they themselves, the pursuer, is actively engaged in activity, in dangerous activity. Where Moshe Feinstein says is that there's a possibility of understanding Rodef in a broader sense, whereby the pursuer is passive, right? And the reason why this person is the source, has the potential to cause loss of life, is due to circumstances beyond his or her control, right? Right? Like if you would ask this person, right, are you a Rodef? You'd be like, I don't think so. But it's the circumstances surrounding that person that can lead us to suggest, or at least entertain the possibility that no, you have the potential, without holding a gun, without holding a knife, you have the potential to cause moral damage. Let's start at the top of the page of the Tosefta. Excuse me, the Tosefta in Truma. The Tosefta in Truma, it says, if a group of people is told by an attacking army, hand over one of your group and we will kill him, otherwise we will kill all of them. Right, so a group of marauders has surrounded a town, and the marauders say, we want X. And if you don't give us X, and obviously we want him, we're going to kill him. Right? And if you don't give us X, we're going to kill all of you, presumably also including X. Right? We're going to kill everyone. Right? So on one hand, you would say this is kind of, first of all, they could kill X and then they could kill the rest of them anyway. Well, taking them at their word, there's like on one level of logic, let everyone survive, right? Besides this X, so maybe the group has the right to offer X up as the sacrifice, as it were, for these marauders, hoping for the potential that they'll keep their word and everyone else will be saved. Right? So what do we say? The group must allow itself to be killed and cannot hand anyone over. Right? Right? So in this case, hand over one of your group, right? They say, we want to kill a Jew. We don't care which one. Sorry. We don't care which one. Just give us one. Right? So can the group decide, we're going to draw lots and whoever has the short straw, we're going to give him to. And then everyone else might be able to survive. So the Tosefta says the group must allow itself to be killed and cannot hand anyone over. This is based on another concept, that the preciousness of life and our inability to judge the value of it. Right? What's called in Hebrew, ma'chazit dami dibach sumach tvei. How do we know that your blood is redder, your life is more valuable? How do we know that that's the case? Right? So this random Jew there's no indication that they want this particular Jew to kill him. They just said to the group, choose one. So the Tosefta says you're not allowed to choose one. The whole group has to sacrifice its life or be willing to sacrifice their life or try to run away, but they're not allowed to hand one off in order to let everyone else be safe. If, however, the Tosefta says the attacking army names a specific individual, just as they specified Sheva ben Bichri. Sheva ben Bichri is a Shmuel Bet, chapter 20, which deals with the case of Yoav and Sheva ben Bichri, who was rebelling against King David. And Yoav wants to cut down literally that rebellion. Sheva ben Bichri runs to a city, and Yoav surrounds the city and says, give us Sheva ben Bichri. And the community is somewhat reluctant, but then a woman goes along, decapitates him, and throws his head over the wall and says, look what we did. We saved him, right? So the Tosefta says that woman who did so in Tanakh is justified because the marauders, the ones who surrounded the city, the bad guys, named the person. and said, this person, we want this person. If you give us this person, then everyone else can live. So according to the Tosefta, at least, right, there is the possibility of viewing this guy who was named by the bad guys as a sacrifice on behalf of everyone else. Right now, the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Yerushalmi in Trumot, tries to unpack this a little bit more, and says that Rav Shimon ben Lakish says that the case of Sheva ben Bichri was different since he was liable for the death penalty. Right? In other words, because Sheva ben Bichri was rebelling against King David, right? He was rebelling against the king. He was Morid b'Malchut. So we know that there's a whole category of those who are Morid b'Malchut. They're liable for the death penalty. So Rav Shimon ben Lakish says this halacha in the Tosefta is very limited. And if someone is liable for their life, right? If they're a wanted individual, if they've done something that's chayav mita, then in that case and only in that case would they be allowed to hand him off. But in any other case, it would be a problem. Rabbi Yochanan, though, says even had he not been liable for the death penalty, he could be handed over, right? So whereas Reish Lakish is very narrow, Rabbi Yochanan is very broad, which leads Rav Moshe Feinstein to ask, how could it be possible? Why is this allowed, right? The bad guys are the ones that name him, right? He's just an innocent guy. He's a sweet guy. He didn't do anything. He didn't do anything wrong, right? Maybe he's the nicest of the bunch. And yet, according to Rabbi Yochanan, we allow him to be handed off. We allow him to lose his life because he was, again, if they didn't choose for a person, then you can't choose a person to lose their life. But if the bad guys chose a person, then you're allowed. How does that work? What's the basis of Rabbi Yochanan? So whether or not we possibly like Rabbi Yochanan, the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah brings both opinions, right? The Ramah actually brings Rabbi Yochanan's opinion first, and then brings Reish Lakish's opinion that it's really very limited when you could allow this. And just to skip down to the Rambam, right? Just to put this in a halachic context, if Gentiles told a group of Jews, "Give us one of you to kill; if not, we will kill all of you." Right? So again, they don't specify. They should allow themselves all to be killed rather than give over a single soul to the Gentiles. However, if the Gentiles single out a specific individual and say, "Give us so and so, give us X, or we will kill all of you," different rules apply. If the person is obligated to die, like Sheva ben Bichri, they give him over to die. However, this instruction is not conveyed to them. In other words, we don't really give that possibility. We assume if he is not obligated to die, they should allow themselves all to be killed. Then they give over a single soul. So Moshe Feinstein in this tshuva that I've given you here, and we'll just talk about it outside, tries to understand the logic of Yochanan, right? How could it be that this guy who's basically innocent, right? The group can lose his life just because he's been singled out by a bunch of bad guys, a bunch of bandits, a bunch of marauders. It seems unfair. And so Rav Moshe begins to formulate is this idea of a passive Rodef. A passive Rodef, which is very different than the biblical understanding of a Rodef. Biblical understanding of Rodef is that they're very much active. Rav Moshe says it's possible perhaps that according to Rabbi Yochanan, we understand that an individual who is not due to his own actions, but due to circumstances surrounding him or her, is causing the death of others, then we can view that person as a Rodef, right? So that's very different, right? So if you wanted to inject that into, let's say, a case of enhanced interrogation methods, right? Again, well, let's just assume that it's the same. Some actually suggest that torture is worse than death, right? Torture is worse than death. We find that in some Gemaras. But let's assume it's on par with each other. Or if that you could kill the guy, you certainly could engage in enhanced interrogation methods. For this conversation, we'll assume that they are at least on par, if torture is not a little bit more lenient. So you know that this person has information that could lead you to prevent deaths of innocents. So this guy This guy wouldn't hurt a fly, but he has he hangs out with pretty bad guys, right? Whatever. Let's say his history, he's not violent at all, but he has information. Can you possibly formulate that as a Rodef, thereby allowing you to engage in torture or even worse, to prevent, to extract the information that will allow lives to be saved? So maybe there is the possibility that there is a category. Moshe entertains the possibility of a category of passive Rodef, and we're going to use that concept again in a few moments. A passive Rodef, but almost an innocent Rodef. I don't want to go that far because they're not innocent, but they're not guilty of murder. Right? They were never going to, with their own hands, cause the death of others. But they could save lives. If they choose not to, then we can intervene and view them as a passive Rodef. So it's a fascinating idea that finds expression again. So that this tshuva of Ramosha Yordea Siman Samach Chelik Beis is a source for this idea of a passive Rodef. I just wanted to give another example of that, which in this tshuva that in this story that Rabbi Dr. Tendler tells about a case that Ramosha weighed in on in 1977. In September of 1977, there were twin girls born in Lakewood, and they were Siamese twins. They were fused from their shoulders to their pelvis. They shared they had separate brains, separate nervous systems. The first question was, maybe it's one entity, just with two heads, right? Like, it's weird, but sometimes nature creates. Anyone been to Ripley's Believe It or Not, right? There's all types of, they have on display animals, but there's no reason why nature couldn't create other things as well. So no, it was two different entities, two different beings, two sisters, separate nervous systems, separate hearts, shared liver, a 6-chamber heart. It was sort of 4 chambers for baby B, and looked like 2 chambers for baby A. But this was a very serious situation. The children were helicoptered to Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, where the chief of surgery evaluated the case, and everyone knew that without surgery, the babies would die. Both. They would both die. This was not a sustainable situation. If they attempted surgery, they probably would both die too. But there was a chance that one would survive the surgery. But for one to survive the surgery, the other one would definitely have to die. So that was the case in front of them. So that's part of that's part of the, right. So that will be part of the question, right? Obviously, as we've learned throughout our remarkable Responsa series, you have to understand the halacha and the mitzias, right? What is the reality of the situation? So number one is it's two different human beings. Number two was the idea that do you do something to potentially save a life, or do you just let nature take its course, right? So I think early on, the recommendation, of course, of the physicians was to try something, because something greater than a 0% chance of success is better than a 0 success chance of viability. Halacha was on the same page, but there was a lot more questions that Halacha wanted to ask before they would sign off on it. By the way, the chief of surgery back then at Children's Hospital was Siever Koop. He became Surgeon General of the United States after that. So some of the questions, that Ramosha asked was what can we understand the viability of each of these children, right? Like Sammy was saying. So, the question that Moshe would come back to was, could the heart be equally given to either of the children, right? Because if the heart could equally be given to either of the children, then you're playing God, right? If it's not, if it's indicated one over the other, then maybe we have something to work with, right? And as we'll see, so let me give you the background and then we'll look at the sources inside. So it was determined through further imaging and over time through tests that let's say baby A, baby A had a circulatory defect. Baby A would not survive even if given the 6-chamber heart. So baby A was the prognosis was grave, no matter what. If they stayed conjoined, or even if baby A was given the whole heart. So after getting that information, a couple days later, October 6th, Rav Moshe told the surgery team to go ahead with it, to go ahead with the surgery. The surgery was performed, and baby A died immediately. They had to build for the 6-chamber heart. They had to build the chest of baby B bigger in order to hold. That was one of the things they didn't realize they'd have to do, and that was a complicated aspect of it. But every specialty in the hospital was on hand because they didn't even know. They knew what they thought they would expect, and then they were ready for all eventualities, all possibilities, and baby B survived the surgery. I'm not sure the baby survived. I don't know the rest of the story. I couldn't. I remember looking it up, and I don't remember what the outcome was. But baby B survived the surgery, and life is life. So it was successful, right? Even though one baby died, the other baby survived the surgery. And what was the basis of Rav Moshe's logic? What was his logical argument? So first off, you had to get the reason why Rav Moshe asked the question whether both babies could equally survive with the heart or equally not survive is because, like we said before, we're not allowed to play God. Right? The idea of who says baby A's blood is more valuable than baby B's blood or life. We don't know, right? Lives are not dispensable, right? And therefore, so that had to be determined. Now, what's interesting is if you turn over the source sheet, what we see, even though we say, right, that you can't prioritize lives, we actually, in one instance, we do, and that is when you have a fetus yet to be born and a pregnant mother. I think I don't think I realized. You know how like you sometimes only realize why something interests you after you start researching it. So this past Monday, I was up in Tallahassee. I'm on this faith-based and community-based advisory council. I was reappointed by Governor DeSantis. I was up there with a group. I'm the only rabbi. There's 25 of us. I'm the only rabbi. There's members of the evangelical community, every denomination of every denomination of Christianity, no Muslims, and me. Right. So each time we explore a different area where faith-based organizations have a vested interest. We often talk about families and poverty and hunger and different agencies that work on these causes and different faith-based nonprofits that do the work, right? That the state agencies and the nonprofits can work together. This meeting in particular, there was a high emphasis on abortion because that was the bill, Senate Bill 5, House Bill, I forget what number, 140 something, about banning abortion after 15 weeks, right? Going from 24 weeks to 15 weeks. And they are, what I can tell you is I was the least frum person in that room when it came to abortion. I was the least frum person there. Everyone was like there were these legislators that came in who were sponsoring the bill, and they were telling us why they sponsored it, and they had to apologize to the members of the faith community that they didn't pass, Texas heartbeat bill or sanctity of life at conception. I'm like, whoa, this is not my company. This is not, these are nice people, but I beg to differ when it comes to issues of abortion. And when we learned about this a few summers ago, we talked about how the position of halacha on abortion is much more nuanced than much of the fundamentalist Christian community about how life begins at conception or even earlier, right? Like they don't know what to do with embryos, stem cell. Remember that was big stem cell research because embryos are killed. Life is even in an embryo. So we don't really, we're not so concerned about that. The potential for life begins at conception. The child is not on equal footing as a human being until the child is born, until the child can breathe on its own, as it leaves the as it is birthed by the mother. But certainly a fetus is a life minus. A life minus. Right? What do I mean by a life minus? It's a life, right? Because if a woman is pregnant and on Shabbos she has an emergency and she's fine, but there's a threat to the fetus, you violate Shabbos, right? So from that perspective, it's a life. But turn over the page, Sanhedrin 72b, right? Chisda raised an objection to Rafuna from a Braita. If a woman was giving birth and her life was being endangered by the fetus, the life of the fetus may be sacrificed in order to save the mother, right? By the way, even in this bill, right, to save the mother, you're always allowed to, you're allowed up to 15 weeks, you're allowed, even after 15 weeks, you'd be allowed to. And if if two doctors sign off, I just learned about this because I was sitting in that room for 2 hours, but if two doctors sign off that this fetus child to be has no viability, then they can, then abortion would be allowed in Florida even after 15 weeks. But so we see that a fetus is not on the same level as the mother, right? If the fetus and the mother were on the same level, you'd have to ask, why is the mother's life more precious? The fetus's life is more precious, and you would have to you wouldn't be allowed to intervene in any way. That's what we say. We say, right, the life of the fetus may be sacrificed in order to save the mother. Once his head was emerged during the birthing process, he may not be harmed in order to save the mother, because one life may not be pushed aside to save another life. And the idea being, until that point in time, if the mother, right, while the child is in utero, if the mother were to die, the fetus would die, right? So if you wanted to look for a benchmark for whether this child is an independent life, kill the mother. No, don't kill them, right? End the mother's life. What happens to this child? If the child is going to expire, then it's not a full life. And then halacha is okay prioritizing the life of the mother, because the life of the mother is a full life, and the life of the fetus is a potential life or a life minus. However, once the child is able to breathe on its own, then they're equal, and they're on equal footing, right? Right? So the question is, if one is permitted to save the pursued party by killing the minor who's pursuing him, why is this so? Right? The fetus is a pursuer who is endangering his mother's life. Right? So why don't we look at it from the perspective of, had this mother not been pregnant, had this mother not been birthing a child, she'd be perfectly fine. Right? What's the threat to life? The threat to life is the fetus. Why don't we view the fetus as being the pursuer? Right? Again, an innocent baby, but because of the circumstances, the baby is causing a threat to the life of the mother. Why don't we say that? Right? Why don't we say that? The baby is causing a threat to the life of the mother. So the answer that the Gemara gives is fascinating. With regards to the woman giving birth, since she's being pursued by heaven. That's right. To put it another way, I think I just wrote this in my column in the monthly bulletin. Childbirth is dangerous. That's why we bench Gomel, even when it goes well. Right? It's dangerous. It's life-threatening, right? So when you talk about, again, in this circumstance, it's worse than usual. But if you were going to allow for intervention that ends the fetus's or the child's life, anytime the mother's life is at risk, then you have basically just sanctioned infanticide across the board, right? Because if every case the mother's life is in risk, what do we view this as, right? Min shamayim karadfi, right? That the pursuit is in God's hands, right? How will this work out? Will the mother live and the child live? Will one of them not live through it? It's up to heaven. It's all part of the natural course of events. If you look at the Rambam, the way it's explained here, right? Since the fetus is not acting of his own volition, endangering his mother of his own free will, his life may not be taken in order to save his mother, right? Here, it's right. We're saying that we don't consider him to be a Rodef, right? Because it's a passive Rodef. Right here, we're saying it's a passive Rodef. Child doesn't mean to hurt the mother, right? It's all happening as part of the natural course of events, perhaps highlighted and more poignant and more dangerous than usual, but within the realm of nature. If you skip Rashi for a second, look at the Rambam, the laws of murder. This is indeed one of the negative mitzvot, not to take pity on the life of a Rodef. Right? We're supposed to remain strong and neutralize the Rodef. If someone's pursuing someone unjustly and is threatening their life, we are commanded not to stand idly by, not to allow that to transpire, that injustice, that mortal injustice. On this basis, our sages ruled that when complications arise and a pregnant woman cannot give birth, it is permitted to abort the fetus in her room, whether with a knife or with drugs, so the fetus is considered a Rodef of its mother, right? So in some cases, we do consider the unborn child a Rodef, so long as it's a life minus before the child is birthed. If the head of the fetus emerges, it should not be touched because one life should not be sacrificed for another. Although the mother may die, this is the nature of the world. Tivo shalom. This is Tivo shalom. So Moshe, it was the argument that's suggested is that why when the child is a fetus, right, and it's completely dependent on the mother, we say that if that fetus is pursuing the mother and there's a life-threatening situation, then the fetus's life can end. So Moshe said that's the case of the Siamese twins. What do you have? You have baby A and baby B. Baby A cannot survive on its own, even if you gave him the whole heart. What was further indicated is that even the blood flow to baby A's 2-chamber heart was only as a result of the 4-chamber heart of baby B. So what emerged, right? It was just there was some the entire sustainability of baby A for this short period of time is exclusively due to baby B. So what Moshe said is that's the relationship between a mother and a fetus. The relationship between baby B and baby A is the relationship between a mother and a fetus. Baby A is only able to survive so long as baby B is providing some sort of sustenance, of some sort of vitality. It's very creative, right? I mean, it's not, right? I mean, we know what a pregnant woman and a fetus looks like, right? That Siamese twins is not what comes to mind, right? But the based on the sources, based on the logic, it's the same idea, and therefore, Ramosha was comfortable in suggesting that baby A is similarly a passive Rodef, like the case of the fetus prior to birthing. Now, he actually, there was some, again, we don't have the actual tshuva, we just have Rabbi Dr. Tendler's notes on his logic. And one of the questions that was asked from Ramosha is what I underlined in the Rambam, that why is it permissible? Why do we say before the child is birthed, then abortion is allowed. Once the child is born somewhat, then we allow it, then it's the nature of the world. So it seems that the fact that it's the natural course of events is part and parcel of the reason why we view the situation as we do. So can you really say that about Siamese twins? It's not the nature of the world. There's nothing, I mean, it's natural, it's not typical. So that was a question. Ramosha was unwilling to see that as a reason to completely change his approach. But here too, we had by enhanced interrogation methods. We also have here by the case of Siamese twins, baby A, we have situations of what we might call a passive rodef, an individual who is not actively causing the death of someone else, but just their presence, right, leads to a mortally dangerous situation. And as such, there are circumstances in which we would allow intervention to neutralize not only the active threat of a rodef, but even the passive threat of a rodef, as indicated in these two cases. Of the case of a ticking time bomb, the case of enhanced interrogation methods, and in the case of the Siamese twins. Any questions?
So, first of all, I think the Rambam's interpretation of the Gemara in Sanhedrin strikes me as novel, like it's Kiddush, to say that a fetus inside of mother is the status of a rodef, because a rodef is specifically a case of two full-fledged lives,
Right.
whereas the fetus is not a full-fledged life, right? And so you could make an argument that the reason we allow a fetus to be aborted for the safety of the mother is because the fetus is not a full-fledged life,
Right.
not because they have the status of the rodef, which is a separate thing. Similarly, right,
So that actually, what I would say for that is that really gets into the topic of abortion in terms of, is it mutter? Do you have to have a reason? Like, does it have to be a really good reason for it? And what is the threshold of permissibility allowed?
I would guess there are to interpret the part.
Right, right.
The other thing is that it seems to me that we're motion to get to the same conclusion that that baby A,
Right.
the one that can't survive,
Yeah, maybe.
is a passive rodef without interjecting the situation of a
Mother.
fetus, right? Just based on the Gemara, just based on the Shalom, right? So you can make the argument that once a person is named, like let's go to Yohanan's line. Once a person is named, then that person, by not giving themselves up, right, is actively causing the death of everyone else around them.
Right. So by naming baby A as the one that won't survive, you're doing something similar.
Yeah.
I mean, the question is though, what does it mean to be liable for death? Right? Right? Right. Right. So it would just be another finish. Right. The idea is it that, right, like that's the machlokas Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, but even according to Reish Lakish, how comfortable are we, right? How comfortable are we applying to this Sheva ben Bichri? Like, does he have to be a Mori b'Malchus? Like, does that have to be that formal? Or is it just that, you know, it's clear from Shemayim that this person is not going to make it, right? But yeah, if we're going to be broad in understanding what it means to be liable for death, then yeah, then you're right. Then you don't have to go into then you may not need the connection with the mother. You could just leave it as a rodef situation.
So I'm assuming the Chinese twins. So that's somebody wants their child.
Once they're out, right?
So, but nowadays when they do these operations in Europe,
Right. Interesting.
so would you say that like this is like secret group and you could do it with more?
Right. It's like the mother's body, right? Obviously, it's less. There's less of a need for the Sanhedrin. There's less of a need for any of that. And if there's a degree of if there's a prognosis that's not zero for either one of them, then you're allowed to do what makes the most sense. You know, that's the question about any type of serious surgery with less than 100% survival rate. right? You're allowed to do that. And if it's in the mother, if it's still part of the mother, I think it's the mother's decision at that point. So it's less sensitive and less of a need to utilize these constructs that they had to do, 45 years ago when they were dealing with it. Once the baby's out, it's a lot more complicated. Yeah.
So the Hanate is that if someone requests asylum in the United States, plus his life is in danger, you must automatically accept. That's true.
What was that?
If someone requests asylum in the United States,
Right.
plus his
Life
life is in danger.
is in danger, right?
The Jewish position is we should accept it.
I guess, I mean,
Assuming the facts turn out to be true.
you have to understand what a clear and present danger is, and how that plays in. I mean, if there's some way of evaluating that similar to a health situation, medical concern, then I guess so. It's just hard to compare medical situations to dangers from afar. Obviously, if someone runs, if the danger is clear and present that we can see it, then for sure, then I imagine so. If that's what's gonna save them, I would say the question becomes, to what extent, if there are dangerous people, can you drop them off? Can you drop people off where they're going to be dangerous people that will clearly be a threat to their life? But yeah, I mean, you'd have to. There's a lot of steps there that would have to be indicated, and the extent to which that matches up with the case of medical clear and present danger. But anywhere where there's a clear and present danger, we have to. Again, that's not a case of Rodef. Rodef would be about, right? It's not about saving the person. It's about neutralizing the threat. So I'm not sure it's comparable, but you're not allowed to put someone in danger. And if someone is clearly in mortal danger, you are authorized, if not required. Again, we could argue on whether we're talking about Jews only or non-Jews included in that as well. But when there's a clear and present danger and someone's being pursued, either figuratively or literally, that has to be neutralized. So you'd have to figure out to what extent that's directly comparable. But as we see, there's a lot of applications to these rules. I guess not. I mean, not. Right. Well, yeah, but it ends up that the two chambers were feeding off 4 chambers, but they had their own circulation from the heart. Yes, right. They had their own circulation from the heart. Yeah.
Does the issue of mental health come into this?
So we had talked about that in terms of abortion. It's very. I have not seen. When you talk about a pursuer, you're asking about a pursuer that's pursuing someone that's causing them mental anguish. That's hard. That's a harder threshold. In other words, to take someone's life because the pursuer is pursuing them in a way that's mentally injurious. That's harder to do because that would be a tough sell. That'd be a tougher sell because it would be indirect, meaning what's the obviously there's an injury, a slight to one's mental health is an injury, but to call that a mortal injury, you kind of have to draw a direct line from the injury to the death, right? I'm not sure anything less than suicide would reach the threshold of that on a mental health level. So it would be a tough sell, but we do say that in our abortion class, maybe you were there, in terms of when you're dealing with a fetus which is lifeless, right? It's not a full life. So what do we mean about protecting the mother's life? Right? That's a little bit of a judge. Like what are the circumstances that allow for abortion in that case if there's a threat to the mother's life? Now again, that may not need to be a mortal threat. because we're dealing with a mother who's a full life and a fetus who's considered life, but a little bit less. So it does play in, not in terms of Rodef, but in terms of the abortion conversation. Well, so, I mean, I don't want to, I'm going to shock my friends on the advisory board, but from this perspective, as long as the child is yet to be born, the child's a life minus 6 months, 7 months, 8 months. It's pretty much all the same until they're breathing on their own. Once the child's born, obviously all bets are off. So even if the child's born at, I don't know, what's the earliest a fetus has been born lately? What's the earliest? 12 weeks, 14 weeks? I don't know. What is it? 14, something like that? Right. So like we would be more machmir, right? If the baby's born at 14 weeks, we can't say that's not a viable fetus as long as it's alive, it's alive. On the flip side, if it's in utero, you don't really, again, it gets complicated, late-term abortion, it gets complicated, but from a very basic level, we don't make that distinction because, just like we don't, on the one hand, we don't say that life begins at conception, and we also don't say that the baby is 100% a living being before it's born. No, even a week before it's born. As long as, so that change, but that changes that right. You just changed the scenario. Now the child's born, right? So now that the child's born, then the child's a full human being, right? So I think in the back of my mind, I was thinking about my uncomfortable time up in Tallahassee, but it was helpful for me to do this. I hope you learned something today. Yeah, that's right. This was meant to be. It was meant to be. Right. We're not going to hold that. But the logic was superimposed on the case where from other areas you could suggest Rodef, or you could suggest this idea of even, again, the other chiddush from Rav Moshe is this possibility that even after the baby was born, since it's completely reliant on its conjoined sibling, that it's sort of like a fetus mother situation. That's also a big chiddush.
But I think when you said the fact is, if there is no live mother, the baby doesn't make it. So therefore that.
Right, so that logic applies to this case too, even though it's not mother-child, it's siblings, right? But it's when you take something out of its setting and you apply it somewhere else, you need broad shoulders, right? Like our motion might say. Okay, thank you very much. Have a great evening.